Welcome to Lesson 2 of Module 7 on ERD rules and problem solving. I'm going to start with an important question about the limits of diagram rules. What kind of errors about identification dependency cannot be detected with the diagram rules? Lesson 2 extends Lesson 1 with coverage of additional diagram rules. Novice data modelers often make errors in parts of an ERD covered by the diagram rules presented in Lesson 2. The objectives in this lesson involve the more difficult parts of an ERD. You want to apply the diagram rules to avoid notational errors and identification dependency. You should apply 3 diagram rules to check identification dependency in an ERD. An essential difference between an ERD and a relational database diagram is named relationships in an ERD versus foreign keys in a relational database diagram. You should eliminate redundant foreign keys in an ERD by applying the foreign key diagram rule. As a more reflective goal, you should be able to explain the limitations of diagram rules when analyzing an ERD for errors. Although these points were covered in Lesson 1 of Module 7, I want to reinforce them now. Diagram rules serve a purpose similar to syntax rules for a computer language. The absence of syntax errors does not mean that a computer program performs its tasks correctly. Likewise, the absence of notation errors does not mean that an ERD provides an adequate data representation for a business situation. The diagram rules do not ensure that you have considered multiple alternatives, correctly represented user requirements, and properly documented your design. Modules 8 and 9 cover these issues to enhance your data modeling skills. This lesson covers consistency rules that prevent conflicts among different parts of an ERD. Because these rules are more complex than the completeness rules, support by design tool is useful. You can use the ER Assistant to check consistency rule violations after creating an ERD using ER Assistant. The class website contains a link to obtain the ER Assistant, available without cost. The first 2 consistency rules ensure correct usage of relationships. Relationships can only be used to connect 2 entity types. In the case of self-referencing relationships, a relationship connects an entity type to itself, such as a supervising relationship connecting an employee to itself. A relationship cannot be used to connect another relationship in an entity type. ERD drawing tools prevent violations of the first 2 consistency rules, so no checking is normally needed if using a drawing tool such as the ER Assistant. Foreign keys are redundant in an ERD, replaced by named relationships. In a later module, you will learn about conversion rules that replace one-to-many relationships with foreign keys to transform an ERD into a table design. Confusion about foreign keys in an ERD is common, perhaps because relational database diagrams appear similar to ERDs. There is no simple, foolproof way to detect a redundant foreign key. You can use a simple method that often works. You should look for an attribute name matching the name of the primary key in the related parent entity type. In this ERD, fact number in the offering entity type matches the primary key of fact number in the faculty entity type. Offering.factNumber is redundant with the teaches relationship in this ERD. The ER Assistant uses a simple rule to check redundant foreign keys, so not all redundant foreign keys can be detected. A number of years ago, the ER Assistant was developed to support the notation and diagram rules used in my database textbook. No other database design tool supports the diagram rules taught in this course. The ER Assistant uses this simple method to determine if an ERD contains a redundant foreign key. The ER Assistant checks the child entity type, that is the entity type on the many side of the relationship, for an attribute with the same name and data type as the primary key in the parent entity type, that is the entity type on the one side of the relationship. If the ER Assistant finds an attribute with the same name and data type, a violation is listed in the rules violation report. Let's use the ER Assistant to check for a redundant foreign key in this ERD. I have previously drawn the ERD using the ER Assistant. To check for errors, I use the Check Diagram button denoted by the check mark. The ER Assistant generates a short report indicating that fact number is redundant in the offering entity type. Identification dependency, involving a weak entity type, and identifying relationships provide more sources of errors than other parts of the crow's foot notation. In addition, each identifying relationship also requires a minimum and maximum cardinality of 1 in the direction from the child, that is the weak entity type, to the parent entity type. Thus, 3 diagram rules are necessary to check correct structure of identification dependency: the weak entity type rule, the identifying relationship rule, and the identification dependency cardinality rule. This ERD demonstrates violations of all 3 diagram rules for identification dependency. The faculty entity type violates the weak entity type rule, as it is a weak entity type, but it is not involved in any identifying relationship. The has relationship violates the identifying relationship rule, as it does not connect a weak entity type. Both offering and course are regular entity types. The cardinality of the registrar's relationship violates the identification dependency cardinality rule. This rule indicates that the minimum and maximum cardinality must both be 1, meaning enrollment must be related to 1 student. This ERD corrects the rule violations shown in the previous ERD. Note that the appropriate resolution typically depends on business requirements. A violation of the weak entity type rule can be resolved by either adding 1 or more identifying relationships or by changing the weak entity type into a regular entity type. In this ERD, the problem is resolved by making faculty a regular entity type. The more common resolution is to add 1 or more identifying relationships. A violation of the identifying relationship rule can be resolved by adding a weak entity type or making the relationship non-identifying. In this ERD, the problem is resolved by making the has relationship non-identifying. A violation of the identification dependency cardinality rule can be resolved by changing the weak entity type's cardinality to 1, 1. Typically, the cardinality of the identifying relationship is reversed. In this ERD, the cardinality of the registrar's relationship should be reversed, that is 1, 1 near student and 0, many near enrollment. As you have briefly seen in this lesson, the ER assistant supports these diagram rules. The relationship consistency rules are supported by diagram construction. Other rules, including the identification dependency rules and the redundant foreign key rule, are supported by the check diagram feature of the ER assistant. As you have seen, the ER assistant is a simple tool designed to support diagram rules in this course and related textbook. In contrast, Visual Paradigm provides both community and commercial editions. I encourage you to install and use Visual Paradigm to gain exposure to a feature-rich data modeling tool with substantial commercial usage. I have provided a video tutorial of Visual Paradigm to support your usage of the tool on data modeling assignments. The Community Edition of Visual Paradigm provides only limited support for diagram rules. The Visual Paradigm supports basic rules involving connections of entity types and relationships through diagram construction. You can only connect 2 entity types via relationship. Visual Paradigm provides limited support for identification dependency. It provides identifying relationships that contribute to the primary key of child entity types. However, it does not support the cardinality rule constraining minimum and maximum cardinalities. Since Visual Paradigm shows foreign keys in an ERD, it does not support the redundant foreign key rule. Let's wrap up Lesson 2 about extended diagram rules for ERDs. This lesson has articulated diagram rules for relationships, identification dependency, and redundant foreign keys. The relationship rules are typically enforced by ERD drawing tools, so you do not need to check them. The diagram rules for identification dependency and redundant foreign keys are common sources of errors for novice data modelers. The ER Assistant, a free ERD drawing tool, provides a convenient check diagram tool for checking these more complex rules. Now let's return to the opening question about the limits of the diagram rules for detecting errors with identification dependency. The diagram rules provide important error checking on usage of weak entity types, identifying relationships, and relationship cardinalities. I have seen many novice data modelers make errors on these elements of identification dependency. However, diagram rules cannot indicate if identification dependency is appropriate to use in a given business situation. Identification dependency is a specialized concept, so it is not commonly used. Modules 8 and 9 will focus on the appropriateness of various data modeling concepts, including identification dependency. After coverage of the notation of ERDs in Module 6 and diagram rules in Lessons 1 and 2 of Module 7, you are now ready for some problem solving in Lessons 3 and 4. The problem solving is limited to creating ERDs from narrative problems that indicate elements in an ERD, as well as checking an ERD for diagram rule violations. Modules 8 and 9 will cover more complex problem solving using business requirements, not just narratives indicating the elements of an ERD.